The Chamber of Eternal Accord had hosted 12 millennia of diplomatic posturing, but it had never seen a species refuse to send a general to a war summit until the humans arrived. High Sovereign Volthax of the Ethelgard hegemony adjusted his optical sensors, focusing on the lone human seated at the obsidian table. The human, Arthur Penhaligon, wore a simple gray suit and carried nothing but a data tablet and a ceramic mug of coffee, a beverage classified by most species as microbial poison. Volthax slammed a clawed gauntlet onto the table, the shockwave rattling the translation matrices of 40 different species. The Aurelia colony is now hegemony territory, the sovereign hissed, his voice translated into a guttural, metallic bark. And yet, the Terran Federation sends an agricultural consultant? You wish to discuss soil pH levels while my fleet surrounds your world. Arthur Penhaligon did not flinch. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. For 73 cycles, humanity had been the galaxy's janitors, accepting the hazardous jobs no one else wanted and apologizing when others stepped on their feet. The Council had grown fat on human cooperation, mistaking their table manners for a lack of predatory instinct. Actually, Sovereign, Arthur said, his voice quiet and disturbingly gentle. I'm here to discuss your logistics. We optimized our wheat yields on Mars using the same distribution algorithms we use for our automated weapons platforms. It's all just mathematics. The chamber erupted in a chorus of chittering laughter from the assembled delegates. They saw a species of mammals who wrote treaties in 12 languages just to avoid conflict. They saw prey pretending to be predators. Arthur's smile finally faded, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. We've spent 7 decades playing nice because we know exactly what we're capable of, he said, standing up and closing his briefcase with a soft, final click. But you've threatened our young and our homes. In our culture, that triggers a specific protocol. Is that a threat, farmer? Volthax mocked, his bioarmor glowing a dangerous violet. It's an observation, Arthur replied, walking toward the exit. He stopped at the door and looked back at the tiers of the Galactic Council. Stage 1 was diplomacy. You laughed through it. Stage 2 was the warning. You ignored it. Now, we are at Stage 3-inch. He checked his watch as a low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the station's hull. I'm starting to get actually annoyed. Suddenly, every holographic tactical display in the chamber turned a deep, static crimson. The 5,000 capital ships of the hegemony fleet, which had been glowing brightly on the grid, began to flicker and vanish one by one. Tactical report. Volthax roared, his mandibles clicking in sudden, sharp panic. What is happening to the fleet? From the back row of the council, a human security specialist stood up and spoke into a comms unit, her voice bored and professional. Cadet Williams, excellent grouping on those practice shots. But remember to lead the target. The Ethelgard ships are heavier than the drones we used in the simulator. Volthax froze. His elite warriors weren't being attacked by a military. They were being used as a live-fire lesson for a human remedial flight class. Arthur Penhaligon looked at the Sovereign one last time. You wanted a war, Volthax. But to us, this is just a midterm exam. Arthur stepped through the doors, leaving the High Sovereign to watch his invincible fleet be picked apart by teenagers. But as the screen showed the hegemony ships being systematically disabled, a new energy signature, biological and gargantuan, began to emerge from the void behind them. High Sovereign Volthax stood frozen on the bridge of the Dread Hegemony, the most advanced warship in the Ethelgard fleet, and felt his primary heart skip a beat. His bridge crew was a mess of flailing appendages and panicked chittering as the tactical display, once a prideful map of Ethelgard dominance, dissolved into a sea of mocking human designations. Report. Volthax roared, his bioluminescent armor flickering to a dull, sickly gray, a sign of genuine distress among his species. Sir, every ship in the fleet has been remotely locked out of its primary weapons and navigation systems. The tactical officer shrieked, his sensory stalks vibrating with terror. We are receiving an incoming transmission on an instructional frequency. The main view screen did not show the face of a human warrior. Instead, it showed a split-screen display of what appeared to be a tactical classroom. A young human woman, barely out of her larval stages by hegemony standards, was pointing at a 3D rendering of Volthax's flagship. Now, Cadets, notice the shield overlap on the Ethelgard dreadnought. The human voice crackled over the open channel, calm and instructional. It's a textbook striker, 9 formation. Very traditional, very predictable. In a real fight, this would be a glaring opening, but for our purposes, it's a perfect target for your deflection shooting drills. Volthax's mandibles clicked in a fury of disbelief. His elite fleet, veterans of a dozen border wars, was being used as a live target for a classroom demonstration. They think this is a game, Volthax hissed, his armor flaring back to a defiant red. They are treating the hegemony as training props? Commander, scanning shows the human fleet is split into small groups. The communications officer reported, his voice cracking. They are tagged as Bravo Tactical Assessment Group and Charlie Wing Remedial Course. Sir, they are broadcasting performance scores for their pilots based on how efficiently they incapacitate us. Outside the viewport, the hegemony's elite fighter wing met the human Alpha Squadron trainees. Volthax watched as his pilots executed the complex high-speed maneuvers that had won them systems. The human ships didn't scatter. They executed a textbook split maneuver so basic it was taught to first-year cadets, yet they timed it with a precision that turned the hegemony's strength into a glaring vulnerability. Nice work, Alpha 3. The human instructor's voice boomed over the bridge speakers. But watch your energy state. You're bleeding speed in those turns. Remember, the Ethelgard ships are slow and heavy. Don't get greedy. Target that instructor. Volthax bellowed, slamming his fist onto the command console. I want their flagship turned to slag. We can't, sir, the gunnery officer cried. The human flagship, the Relentless, isn't even in combat mode. They've deployed training munitions, reduced yield plasma charges designed to track shield fatigue without causing total hull failure. They are literally pulling their punches to make the lesson last longer. Across the sector, 5,000 of the hegemony's finest ships were being systematically disabled, their engines shot out and weapons neutralized, while human teams discussed their spacing and defensive coordination over open frequencies. It wasn't a battle, it was a performance review where the hegemony was currently failing. Volthax looked at the latest performance score broadcasted by the humans. Ethelgard Hegemony Tactical Rating, D-. Predictable maneuvers, lacks innovation. Recommend for basic remedial course. Sovereign, the communications officer whispered, looking at a new alert. We've received a direct message from the human representative, Arthur Penhaligon. It's a 20% off coupon for the Terran Coalition's annual War Games tournament. He says he hopes we'll be better prepared next year. The bridge of the dread hegemony fell into a deathly silence as the hegemony's pride crumbled into ionized dust. Volthax looked at his unmoving fleet and realized that while they had been planning for a war of conquest, humanity had been planning a training curriculum. But then, the static on the viewscreen cleared. The instructional classroom vanished, replaced by the face of Admiral Marcus Webb, a man with cold, shark-like eyes who looked significantly less friendly than the instructors. All right, trainees, that's enough for today, Webb said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous pitch. The Sovereign isn't laughing anymore. Phase 1 is over. Now let's see how they handle the actual military. Behind the Admiral, the stars seemed to distort. Massive, dark signatures began to emerge from slipspace. Ships so gargantuan, they made the hegemony's dreadnoughts look like shuttles. High Sovereign Volthax stood on a bridge that was rapidly becoming a tomb. The biological roar that had vibrated through the hull of the dread hegemony wasn't a sound carried by air, but a psychic and gravitational shockwave that bypassed the laws of physics. On the tactical monitors, the energy signatures of the human First Fleet were no longer just dots. They were massive, shifting anomalies that the hegemony's computers labeled as unresolvable. Sovereign, the human representative is hailing us again, the communications officer whispered, his voice trembling so violently his translation matrix struggled to stabilize. Arthur Penhaligon's face appeared on a secondary monitor, still sitting in the quiet observation lounge of the council station. He was no longer holding his coffee. He was leaning forward, his eyes devoid of the polite, janitorial warmth the galaxy had grown accustomed to over the last 73 cycles. I told you I was getting annoyed, Volthax, Arthur said, his voice flat and clinical. Phase 1 was the demonstration of your military's obsolescence. Phase 2 was the training of our youth. You are now entering Phase 3, systemic deconstruction. Volthax lunged toward the screen, his violet armor flashing a chaotic, panicked white. You hide behind tricks and biological monstrosities. We have warships that can sterilize planets. We will jump to your core worlds, and you will jump nowhere, Arthur interrupted. While you were laughing at the farmer in the front row, my colleagues in the back row were finishing the mathematics of your extinction. Behind Arthur, the holographic data pad held by Priya Okanungo glowed with a terrifying complexity. Sovereign, she said, her voice echoing through the bridge. We have spent the last 3 years analyzing the hegemony's systemic causes. We didn't study your battles. We studied your accounting. We mapped your supply lines, your fuel consumption rates, and your ammunition expenditure patterns. Volthax felt a coldness settle in his primary heart. At exactly 0900 hours, we initiated a coordinated cyber attack on your primary logistical hubs, Arthur explained. Your refineries on Coria Prime have ceased production. Your food distribution networks in the Aurelia sector have been redirected to human relief centers. Even the medications your species requires to survive in standard oxygen environments have been flagged as contraband by our automated trade bots. This is impossible, Volthax roared. Our encryption is outdated, Arthur finished. You forgot the cardinal rule of warfare. Never judge a species by how they act in peacetime. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We became the monsters that other monsters made deals with because that is what survivors do. Outside the viewport, the first of the Arctic dragons materialized fully. It was 2 kilometers of iridescent scales and wings the size of battlecruisers. It didn't fire lasers. It opened its maw and expelled plasma contained within a biological magnetic field, a beam that hit the hegemony's secondary dreadnought, the Iron Will, and simply unmade it. The most advanced defensive technology in the galaxy didn't explode. It converted to constituent atoms and scattered like cosmic dust. The dragons are the opening act, Arthur said, his image beginning to flicker as he prepared to cut the transmission. They are the guardians we locked away because we feared what they represented, the proof that humanity's ancestors made bargains with things that should not exist. Volthax watched as 3 more gargantuan signatures emerged from Earth's polar fault zones on the long-range scanners. You have 1 hour to begin a full withdrawal from all human sectors. Arthur's final warning carried the weight of 3 billion potential graves. After that, we don't just target your ships. We target the addresses of every politician who voted for this incursion. We have a very detailed list. The screen went black. Sovereign, the tactical officer shrieked, pointing at the sensors. The biological signatures aren't moving toward the fleet anymore. They're entering slipspace. They're heading for our home world. The metallic crate sat in the center of High Sovereign Volthax's private sanctuary, humming with a low-frequency vibration that set his sensory stalks on edge. His inner sanctum was located in the heart of the dread hegemony, protected by 3 meters of reinforced neutronium and 6 layers of phase-shifting shields. Nothing should have been able to teleport inside. Yet, there it was, smelling faintly of ozone and mountain pine. With a trembling claw, Volthax triggered the release. The lid hissed open, revealing not a bomb, but a collection of items arranged with insulting, clinical neatness. Inside were 12 suits of Shadowborn combat armor, the hegemony's most elite, invisible to radar killing machines. Each suit was scorched and deactivated. Resting atop the armor was a stack of 12 Kravathi combat blades, standard issue for the hegemony's legendary assassins, each one trained from birth in 17 different arts of killing. Volthax reached for the top blade. Etched into the obsidian-grade steel in perfect Ethelgard script were 5 words: "Send better assassins next time." His primary heart seized. 6 hours ago, in a desperate, unsanctioned move, Volthax had dispatched the Shadowborn to Earth. Their mission had been simple: infiltrate a remote safe house in a region called Montana and eliminate the human strategist, Marcus Kane. The Shadowborn were legendary. Each had successfully eliminated at least 50 high-value targets across the stars. They had been dead within 45 seconds of landing. A small holographic projector at the bottom of the crate activated. It didn't show a war room or a fleet. It showed a human man, Marcus Kane, sitting on a wooden porch, drinking from a ceramic mug while 12 bodies in elite armor lay in a neat, chronological circle around his property. "Hello, Volthax," the human said, his voice conversational and terrifyingly calm. "I've known about your Shadowborn operation for 6 weeks. I've read every communication, decoded every strategy session, and tracked every resource allocation. I let them land because you needed to learn that Earth isn't a backwater planet you can push around. We don't run. We adapt. We win." Volthax backed away from the crate, his bioluminescent armor flashing a pale, transparent green, the color of total shock. "How?" he whispered to the empty room. "Our mission brief was encrypted with level 9 quantum algorithms." The recording continued as Kane stood up and walked toward the camera. "You're wondering how we bypassed your security. You're wondering where we got the resources. The truth is, while you were monitoring our public military, you completely missed homeworld security. We have agents embedded in almost every major galactic power, including your own High Council. We've been watching you while you thought you were watching us." The hologram shifted, displaying a list of names. Volthax's optical sensors widened. These were his regional governors, his intelligence directors, and his own mate and offspring. Next to each name was a timestamp and a relocation status. "I gave your remaining 5 operatives on Earth a choice." Kane's voice dropped to a gravelly low. "A choice to leave within 24 hours or face permanent relocation to a pine box 6 feet under Montana soil. They chose to leave. Now, I'm giving you the same choice." The dread hegemony groaned as a massive gravitational pull suddenly seized the ship. Volthax lunged for the bridge comms, but the system was dead. The lights in his sanctuary flickered and died, replaced by a pulsing, bioluminescent blue that hummed with the same energy signature as the dragon's. The transition was not a teleportation in the traditional sense. It was a localized breakdown in fundamental physical laws. High Sovereign Volthax stood trembling in the center of the council chamber of eternal accord, his violet bioarmor now a dull, ash gray. The reinforced neutronium of his private sanctuary had not been breached. It had simply ceased to be matter, unmade by a force that convinced his atoms they no longer wanted to maintain molecular bonds. Volthax looked up, his 4 golden eyes scanning the 300 tiers of the amphitheater. The chamber was filled with the representatives of 4,000 species, all of them standing in a silence so absolute it felt like a vacuum. None of them looked at the central platform. Every eye, sensor, and optical receptor was turned toward the very back, Tier 297. There sat the human delegation. They were not in battle armor. They were not wielding plasma rifles. Ambassador Arthur Penhaligon sat with his legs crossed, while his attaché, Priya Okanungo, calmly documented the sovereign's arrival on her datapad. Beside them, the 3 security specialists, Carter, Jackson, and Martinez, sat with a casual, unbothered posture that radiated more menace than 1,000 dreadnoughts. "You asked why we requested the back row, Sovereign." Arthur's voice carried clearly across the hall without the need for amplification. "You thought it was a sign of weakness, a species knowing its place at the bottom of the hierarchy." Volthax tried to speak, but his vocal chambers were paralyzed by a subsonic frequency humming through the floor. "We chose the back row because it provides the best sight lines in the house," Lieutenant Jackson said, her eyes never leaving the display. "From up here, we can see the real council, not the performance. We see who is honest, who is hiding something, and who is posturing for a power grab. We mapped your empire from these seats," Martinez added, his fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern on the railing. "While you performed for the front row, we tracked your response times, your supply chain vulnerabilities, and your social fractures. We didn't need to infiltrate your borders. We just had to watch you when you thought nobody was looking." Priya looked up from her pad, her expression clinical. "We ran probability analyses on 17 different seating configurations. The back row gave us a 15.1-second response time for 83% of potential conflict scenarios. Your tactical collapse is currently running 0.8 seconds ahead of our most conservative estimate." Volthax finally found his voice, a ragged, metallic hiss. "You are monsters. You hide behind spreadsheets and table manners while your creatures unmake my people." "No," Arthur corrected, standing up and descending the tiers with a slow, measured gait. We are survivors of a world that tried to kill us for 4 billion years. We spent 73 cycles trying to be your partners. We mediated your disputes, offered you humanitarian aid, and smiled when you mocked us as galactic janitors. He reached the central platform, standing just meters away from the sovereign. But you mistook our preference for peace as an inability to wage war. You forced us to wake the things we had hoped to never unleash. You forced us to stop being diplomats and start being the species our planet created us to be. Arthur gestured toward the massive view screen. The hegemony's core world, Coria Prime, was no longer visible. It was obscured by a humanoid entity 300 meters tall, built from living metal that pulsed with fusion-level energy, a titan. The entity reached out and simply closed its fist around the orbital defense grid. The neutronium platforms crumbled like tissue paper. "We call that the main event," Arthur said, his face reflecting the dying light of the hegemony's defenses. "The dragons were just the scouts. The titans are the proof that our ancestors were not quite as human as we preferred to believe." High Sovereign Volthax was suspended in the center of the council chamber, held fast by the shifting, multi-dimensional limbs of the Pacific entity. He was a creature of war, a conqueror of 17 systems, yet he felt like a specimen pinned to a board. Below him, the human representative, Arthur Penhaligon, checked his stopwatch with the clinical detachment of a man timing a soft-boiled egg. "You spoke of honor and military tradition, Volthax," Arthur said, his voice echoing with a terrifying lack of emotion. "But humans learned a long time ago that war is not about bravery. War is about logistics, resources, and mathematics." On the massive holographic display at the center of the hall, the Ethelgard hegemony's map was being systematically unmade. The 40,000 warships the Sovereign had kept in reserve, his invincible fleet, were being identified not as threats, but as variables in an equation that had already been solved. "You wondered how we could defeat you in 11 hours, Arthur continued, gesturing to the data scrolling across Tier 297. "We didn't need to outfight you. We outcalculated you. We identified your supply lines, your fuel consumption rates, and your ammunition expenditure patterns months ago." The council watched in stunned silence as the icons of the hegemony fleet began to flicker out. They weren't being engaged in glorious dogfights. They were running out of oxygen. Their reactors were being remotely signaled to enter safe mode, and their automated repairs were being overwritten with shutdown commands. "This is the accountant's war," Priya Okanungo announced from the back row, her voice crisp and professional. "We calculated that your resistance would require resources you simply did not have once we seized your primary refineries. We made you do the mathematics of your own defeat." Volthax let out a ragged hiss, his violet armor pulsing a frantic, sickly yellow. "You hide behind numbers. You are prey pretending to be predators." "No, Sovereign," Arthur corrected, looking up with a gaze that held the weight of 3 billion potential casualties. "We are apex predators who chose to have table manners. We preferred the role of diplomats because it was more profitable for everyone. But you forced us to default to our other specialization, surviving." On the screen, a titan on the planet Coria Prime reached the central government hub. It did not level the city. It simply sat atop the legislative palace, its living metal body absorbing every broadcast and transmission, effectively silencing the Empire's voice. "Phase 3 is concluding," Arthur announced to the room. "The Ethelgard hegemony has been effectively dismantled in exactly 10 hours and 47 minutes. We have 17 minutes left in our projected window to address Phase 4, the Red List." Volthax felt the grip of the Pacific Entity Titan. "We have identified every politician who voted for the Aurelia incursion," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low that made the air in the chamber vibrate. "Every military commander who followed the orders to target our civilians. Every pilot who dropped bombs on our research centers." He tapped a button on his data tablet. A list of names appeared, thousands of them, scrolling in bright, clinical red. "We do not want your territory," Arthur said, his eyes locking with the Sovereign's golden ones. "We want justice. Human justice. The trial of every individual on this list will begin in 72 hours. They will wish we had simply killed them in the vacuum of space." "And me?" Volthax choked out, the multidimensional tentacles of the Pacific entity now beginning to phase through his chest plate. "You," Sovereign are the final variable, Arthur replied. You represent the hubris of the old galaxy. We are not going to kill you. We are going to make you an example. Suddenly, the council chamber's lights flared with a blinding, fusion-bright intensity. The Pacific entity let out a low-frequency hum that shattered the obsidian table in the front row. The transition of power across the sector was not marked by a coronation, but by a forensic audit. 72 hours after the Ethelgard hegemony's fleet was reduced to drifting scrap, the Red List trials began with a clinical speed that horrified the remaining Galactic Council members. Humanity did not seek the destruction of the Ethelgard people. They sought the systematic extraction of the leadership that had viewed genocide as a viable political strategy. Across 17 star systems, the red-coated individuals, those who had enthusiastically authorized the orbital bombardment of Aurelia, found that the galaxy had become a very small place. They were extracted from deep underground bunkers and phase-shifted safe rooms by human teams who moved with the patient, terrifying grace of apex predators. There was no fighting, only the sound of neutronium walls unmaking themselves as the Pacific entities, those multidimensional horrors, phased through reality to collect their debts. On the council floor, Arthur Penhaligon stood before the assembly, his simple gray suit a stark contrast to the holographic projections of colossal, living metal titans now stationed in the upper atmosphere of the capital world. He looked at the empty seat formerly held by Sovereign Volthax, now an occupant of a living, organic prison located in a secure human facility, and then addressed the gathered delegates. Human justice for genocide is not an execution, Arthur said, his voice flat and projecting a weight that made the translation matrices of 40 species whine with feedback. Death is a mercy we cannot afford to give. Instead, the targets on our red list have been relocated to a specialized habitat in Montana. There, the war criminals were subjected to the accounting. They were provided with advanced medical care to ensure their lifespans were extended far beyond biological norms, only to spend every waking second viewing the faces and hearing the life stories of the 3 billion humans they had attempted to erase. It was a sentence of absolute remembrance, enforced by the very table manners the hegemony had once mocked. While the red list was being cleared, the council was forced to accept the new human-led reality. Humanity formally claimed its permanent seat with full voting rights, a move supported by the Syndicate worlds and other species who had seen the mathematics of peace firsthand. The Ethelgard hegemony was officially reorganized into an associated protectorate, its industry redirected toward reparations, and its youth re-educated under human logistics and species identification protocols. You are not simply diplomats anymore, Chancellor Morix noted, his voice tired and heavy with the realization that the balance of power had shifted forever. We never were, Arthur replied, taking a final sip from his ceramic mug. We were predators who chose to be diplomats because we understood that the alternative was extinction, our own or yours. We learned that cooperation was more profitable than conflict, but we never forgot how to fight for our survival. As the council prepared to adjourn, a new alert flashed across Tier 297, where the human security team remained at their posts. In the far reaches of the Outer Reach, a previously dormant aggressive empire, the Vorqual Confederacy, had begun mobilizing their fleet, having misinterpreted the hegemony's fall as an opening for their own expansion. The human security team in the back row didn't even reach for their weapons. Lieutenant Jackson simply pulled up a new distribution algorithm on her datapad and adjusted her sightlines to the far-distant sector. They haven't seen the main event yet, she noted dryly, her eyes tracking the movement of the Vorqual ships 40 light-years away. Arthur Penhaligon looked at the screen, then at the council delegates who were beginning to panic. He didn't offer a grand speech, and he didn't call for a mobilization. Priya, Arthur said, checking his watch with the same calm he had used for the wheat reports. Inform Admiral Webb that the remedial flight class needs a new practical exam. It seems the Vorqual would like to volunteer as our next training targets. The Vorqual Confederacy's attempt at expansion lasted exactly 9 minutes, 2 minutes shorter than the hegemony's collapse. They did not meet the human military. They met the varsity team of the Terran Defense Force, who treated the engagement not as a war, but as a finalized demonstration of creative disassembly. By the time the Vorkwal High Command realized their energy signatures were being unmade by the Pacific entities, their defensive grids had already been converted into ionized dust. The message was received by every star system in the known galaxy. Humanity was no longer asking nicely. In the council chamber of eternal accord, the atmosphere had shifted from one of bureaucratic squabbling to one of silent, reverent dread. Tier 297 remained occupied by the human delegation, but now, the seats in the front rows were empty. Every major power, the Valdrines, the Krell, and the Horthax, had moved to the back rows, desperately trying to see the room the way the humans did. They had learned that power was not about the proximity to the speaker's podium, but about the clarity of the sight lines. Ambassador Arthur Penhaligon stood at the central platform for the final time, his gray suit impeccably pressed and his ceramic mug empty. The Ethelgard hegemony has been fully assimilated, Arthur announced, his voice carrying the weight of a species that had climbed to the top of a Deathworld food chain through pure terrifying persistence. Their industrial centers are now producing human-spec medical supplies, and their youth have been enrolled in mandatory species identification training. They are no longer our enemies. They are our largest trading partners. The High Sovereign Volthax was not there to witness it. He remained in his living cage in the Montana safe house, overseen by Marcus Kane. He was kept perfectly healthy by advanced human medicine, forced to contemplate the mathematics of his own hubris for as long as his extended lifespan allowed. He had become a case study in cosmic irony, the conqueror of 17 systems, now a permanent guest of an agricultural consultant. We are returning to our primary specialization, Arthur continued, looking at the hushed assembly, which is cooperation. We prefer peace. We prefer trade agreements, agricultural optimization, and agricultural exports. But let the record show that Earth remembers everyone who tried to claim us. He paused, and the three security specialists in the back row, Carter, Jackson, and Martinez, stood up in unison. We are apex predators who chose to become diplomats because the alternative was extinction, Arthur said, his eyes scanning the tiers. We smile because we are happy, not because we lack teeth. We have table manners, but we have not forgotten how to hunt. Chancellor Morix looked down at the human representative, his voice barely a whisper. And the monsters? The titans? The dragons? Arthur smiled, that unsettling human smile that showed too many teeth. They have returned to the deep places. They are sleeping again, satisfied that their legacy is protected. We promised them the galaxy, Chancellor. We hope we never have to give it to them. With a final, polite nod, the human delegation exited the chamber. They did not take a shuttle to a warship. They took a civilian transport back to Earth, where Arthur had a wheat production report waiting on his desk. As the Veritha's Claw and other merchant vessels resumed their routes, they found the galaxy remarkably quiet. No pirate dared to cross a human shipping lane. No empire dared to reposition a human colony. Every species had updated their diplomatic protocols with the annoyance protocol. If a human says they are getting annoyed, you fix the problem immediately. The galaxy had finally learned the lesson that the hegemony had died to teach. Humanity is the most dangerous species in the void, not because they want to rule, but because they are perfectly capable of unmaking anyone who won't let them live in peace. In a small cabin in Montana, Marcus Kane sat on his porch and looked at the stars. He took a sip of coffee and glanced at the plaque on his rail. Welcome. Please don't make me kill you. The galaxy, for once, was listening.